How did Dr. Lacerda knew about apometry? Because so far we know he was studying, and it was 10 years. He studied on 1945, and 1955 he was a medical doctor. Okay, had nothing to do with apometry at that time. So how did it start? So everything began during the 6th Pan American Spirit Congress held in Argentina, Buenos Aires, its capital, on 1963. That was that Congress. Dr. Lacerda was not in there. So on that Congress, 1963, there was somebody, a biochemistry and pharmacist, Luis J. Rodriguez. And he presented his thesis of hypnometry. It was that guy. Mr. Rodriguez was a well-established Puerto Rican with a vast knowledge in different areas around the world. And at that time, he was living in Brazil. He resided in Brazil and went to that Congress, hoping that he could influence spiritists and doctors, psychiatrists, with his thesis under the name of hypnometry. Now we are going to talk a little bit about that. So according to Mr. Rodriguez, who had a vast experience with, in that area with his own patients. At that time, he already had his own patients. According to him, through the techniques of hypnometry, medical doctors could access the spiritual memory of their patients and find in those memories the causes of psychic disorder rooted in bad and sad experience of their past lifetimes. That was, like, let's say, the basis of everything. Doctors can do that. And he had experiences doing that, even though he was not of the area of medical doctor or psychiatrist. However, his thesis at that time did not impress much. It was not well appreciated as he believed it would be. It aroused curiosity in some of the congressmen, but most of them remained indifferent to it. It did not cause much impression. Everything he did was like nobody saw. However, there was a guy in there, and that guy, Mr. Ferrari, Conrado Ferrari, he was from Rio Grande do Sul, Porto Alegre, the capital of Rio Grande do Sul. He was the executive director of the Spirit Hospital. Mr. Ferrari, at that time, was known by his vast knowledge in spiritual issues, and a great respect for others in general, whoever he or she was, and a very spiritualized guy. That was him. And it sounded like a light at the end of the tunnel, this connection between Mr. Ferrari and the thesis of Mr. Rodriguez. So, Mr. Ferrari was amazed with the presentation of that thesis. And thinking about the benefits it could bring to the patients of the hospital, the Spirit Hospital, he did not lose any time. Right away, he invited Mr. Rodriguez to do the same thing in the hospital, to go to South Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul, and present his thesis and the techniques to doctors and psychiatrists and all the others who could be there assisting or attending. So it was set to be done 2 years later. So it was 1965, the meeting was held in the Spirit Hospital. He did the same thing, he presented the same thing. One more time, the subject of hypnometry did not cause a significant impression on the medical doctors and non-medical doctors. They did not pay attention much to it. Again, as a light at the end of the tunnel, that subject was somehow listened by Dr. Lacerda. Dr. Lacerda was not a medical doctor of the Spirit Hospital at that time, but he was attending that meeting. It was Mr. Ferrari who met him, who knew him, and his vast knowledge on the spiritual issue, and a great guy that he was, known for being young and a great guy, developing his studies and practices in a spiritual issue, and so forth and so forth. He knew Dr. Lacerda, even though Dr. Lacerda was not a doctor of that hospital. So he invited him in. And the same thing happened. Dr. Lacerda was amazed with the new technique, totally amazed. How does hypnometry really work for patient? That's exactly what he wanted to know. And he saw in that presentation, he saw ways opening for him. He was a visionary. We must understand that he was a visionary, as Mr. Ferrari was a visionary. So he could see, he jumped ahead and could see the future stamped in front of him. He could see it. So he was as amazed as Mr. Ferrari was at the first time. So let's see what Mr. Rodriguez says about the question. He said, first of all, he said, all I'm going to tell you is based on my own experiences. So he said that the technique was simple, with no dogmas, no hypnotism. It was an astral projection with separation between the physical and astral bodies, as if the patient were discarnate. That was his first question. That's the way it goes. He went on. He said it was done with the patient, an operator, the spirit guides of the patient, and the spirit guides of the operator. Operator, it would be the one who leads everything. And he also said, the operator must be knowledgeable in a spiritual issue, be open-minded, free of dogmas and blind doctrine. The patient, and then he went on, the patient are sent to an astral institution where they would receive the help they needed. So that's what I'm doing. Dr. Lacerda was even amazed. That's the way we work and have been working for a while. So soon after the presentation of that happened in the Spirit Hospital, Dr. Lacerda attended 2 more sessions of hypnometry with Mr. Rodriguez. And he noticed, since the first one, he noticed that the technique had to be, the technique itself there had to be the use of magnetic power. He could not understand perfectly, but he saw everything, and he said it must be magnetic power field on it. But he did not understand much at that time. Then, by observing and analyzing everything, Dr. Lacerda came to a conclusion. Let's see the first thing he thought, the conclusion he made. The name hypnometry did not seem to be appropriate, since Mr. Rodrigues did not use sleep, and hypnos in Greek means sleep. He noticed that there was no sleep, it was conscious. The separation was done consciously. He said, he went on, nor did he try to induce it with suggestion, making the patient unconscious, like in hypnotism. So it is not hypnotism, it is not under sleep. He noticed that what Mr. Rodrigues used was a kind of a slow regressive counting, starting with the number corresponding the age of the patient. If the patient were 80 years old, he started counting from 80 to 0. And when the counting was over, the patient was separated. That's what he noticed. That's what was going on, but consciously. So let's see what he did. He said more. He observed the patient being separated. He also observed that it was not a medium in trance. It was not unconscious with hypnosis. It was not as a medium in trance, incorporated with a trance. That's what it was. Unfolding of the astral body from the physical body under mental command. The third thing he observed was that he understood that the cause of success of the technique, hypnometry, was not yet known even by Mr. Rodrigues. He thought right away. He was a visionary, a very smart guy, knowledgeable in spiritual issue, and many other kind of like the other lines, the other ways of the same thing, philosophy and others, theosophy. He understood that was something else. And Mr. Rodrigues was doing something but did not know yet the power of what he was doing or the success of it. Nobody knew at that time, as he thought. After the second session, Dr. Lacerda asked Mr. Rodrigues if anyone could do that, which he answered, yes, anyone can do that. It's not only for doctors or psychiatrists. Anyone can do that. And what did he do? What did Dr. Lacerda do? He went home, and right away, that same day, he took his wife, who was a medium, trained medium already, because they were working spiritually. On the time of this meeting with Mr. Rodrigues, Dr. Lacerda was working as a medical doctor for 10 years. It was 1965, and he started working as a medical doctor in 1955. And he was married with his wife, and his wife was a very trained medium. In other words, right away he experienced the technique with his wife and did the same thing successfully, and was even amazed with what he could do, because he was acting like an operator, but also a medical doctor with experience in conventional medicine, physical medicine, and at the same time with experience in spiritual medicine. He was with experience in both sides. And as an operator, he was the perfect guy. Visionary, very young. He was amazed. He thought, I believe there is something much more to be found in this sense. Dr. Lacerda asked other questions, like, for example, what is the difference between Spiritism and hypnometry? He wanted to go further. Let's see what Mr. Rodrigues explained through his knowledge. Actually, he did not mention, Mr. Rodrigues, that he was a Spiritist, that he knew much about that. No, even though Dr. Lacerda understood that even though he was not a Spiritist, but he knew a lot about that. Probably he did not want to compromise, but he knew. So let's see what he says. He answers what is the difference between Spiritism and hypnometry. He goes with, he explains on one point of view, then he explains on another point of view, and then he gives his own opinion about that. Let's see what Mr. Rodrigues answers his question. First thing he said about hypnometry, he said, the astral medicine happens with the limited separation between the somatic anatomy and psychic anatomy of the patient. That we already know because that is the unfolding. Okay. Then he said, the astral medical treatment is made on the astral body in the astral medical office, which means the patient has to be sent to an astral institution. What else he says? It must be a limited and momentary separation. Now he goes on explaining about Spiritism. Now he says, now it's how the spirits act. He says the astral entities come with the spirit remedies, spirit machines, and spirit process of adequate therapeutic treatment to find the right diagnosis, the right healing according to each case. In other words, he said, I send the patients to an astral institution after I do what I should do in here. And the spirit doctors receive the patient and use the right medicine, the right diagnosis, the machines if necessary, with the right healing process, adequate and right healing process. That's the way it happened. I do my part in here, they do their parts in there. That's the way he was working with hypnometry. Now he comes with his opinion. He says, the great medical doctors and psychiatrists of the future will be those who will be able to heal the physical body and the spiritual body of the patients, and be able to do even further and heal the spirit of the patient once they are in the other world. This is deep. So that's the doctors and psychiatrists of the future. And Dr. Lacerda was a medical doctor taking care of the spiritual, of the physical body, and at the same time, the spiritual body. So what he said is, the doctor of the future is the one who will be able to do both. He was in front of the one who was already a doctor of the future and willing to make a difference, to find something else to give to us. Now, Dr. Lacerda wanted to know more about that, and he did not stop since then. He began his experience exactly that time. It was in the beginning, March of 1965, he became a doctor, medical doctor of the Spirit Hospital. Shortly after, he formed a great team of mediums and operators, of systematic studies and scientific research to establish Apometry. He did not lose time. It was exactly 1965, March of that year, that he started the experience with a great group of mediums that he already knew because he was working on that for more than 20 years. And during the time he was studying medicine, practicing medicine, and working as a medical doctor, he was always working spiritually. So he knew already the mediums he could work with and all the other things. So he did not lose time. The team was formed with a considerable number of mediums and operators, all trained to the methodology of soul investigation. They were prepared. When things are ready to go, it is kind of magical because one comes from one side, the other comes from one side, and suddenly the time comes and everything works well. That's what happened to him. It was that year that he started without stopping anymore. Right at the beginning, in a series of experiences, Dr. Lacerda and his team workers, researchers, could prove that what really caused the unfolding between the physical body and the soul of the patient was in fact the magnetic energetic impulses. That's what caused the separation. Magnetic energetic impulses on the patient's astral body, astral and mental body. He found and proved that together with his team workers, his team researchers. That was the secret. Based on that sense, on that proof, he changed the name hypnometry to apometry. Since through the technique of apometry, one can go far beyond time and space consciously. There is no sleeping, there is no hypnotism, it is consciously. But when you separate it, remember on the first block of apometry, what Dr. Costa, Victor Ronaldo Costa said, it is a kind of somnambulism. The mediums become like somnambulists. They can interact with both ways, with the spiritual world and the physical world. That's the separation, conscious unfolding, conscious separation. So in 1975, 10 years after he started with apometry, on the 10th Pan American Congress of Spiritism, held in Mar del Plata, Argentina, Dr. Lacerda presented his thesis under the name, The Science of Spirituality Applied to Medicine. He presented his thesis. It was done with clear explanation of each part he presented, all based on careful and accurate results. It was 10 years of experiencing and writing down everything. It was many times a week. They did not rest. He presented everything with proofs. However, as it happened to Mr. Rodrigues, his technique was not well received unfortunately. It was not well received by many medical doctors and non-medical doctors. Same thing that happened before. But he did not care much about that. But since then, a considerable number of Spiritists who follows and followed Dr. Lacerda has spread out throughout Brazil and has increased the disclosure of Apometry. And I want to tell you carefully, you be conscious when you want to know about Apometry, be very conscious and open-minded, because you will find many people saying stupid and horrible things about Apometry. Certainly are people who don't know, because when you don't know something, you have a tendency to criticize, depending on who you are. But that's exactly what happened. It was a new technique, but based on responsible research involving many people, involving many questions, repeating things many times. It was 25 years of hard work in order to establish Apometry. So that's what happened. He was not, with his thesis, the science of spirituality applied to medicine, it was not well considered, well received. But it happened. So far, the mediums and others who saw it happen continued, and other big groups came and so forth. Dr. Lacerda based the advanced technique of Apometry, he based on scientific and empirical knowledge. From mathematics, you calculate many things, from mathematics, from electromagnetism, from quantum physics, from psychology, from psychism and spiritism. It is all together. And if you want to work with Apometry, and you should, because it is really a great thing to do with a great technique, you must study a lot in order to understand many things, especially about psychology and psychism, because it is, as Dr. Costa said many times, it is a psychic research. You go into the mind and into the soul of the patient and search in order to find what is in there that is bothering him. So it is psychotherapy. You go deep inside the traumas, deep inside whatever it brings, in order to find the root of the matter. So you must be willing to study other things like those who are the base of Apometry. Together with the team, a great team of mediums, Dr. Lacerda, working all those years, he codified the 13 laws of Apometry. By working many years with the technique and assisting people from Brazil and from around the world, all for free, all free of charge, that always has been free of charge, he codified the natural 13 laws of Apometry. Apometry is established with the 13 laws. Dr. Lacerda once said, Apometry is not exactly a science, much less a philosophy or religion. Apometry is a powerful advanced technique to help the patients. So he is clear on what he said. Dr. Lacerda was the head of the Psychic Research Division of the Spirit Hospital in Porto Alegre for 20 years. He was the head of that division. He based on the many years, based on the many years of experience to establish apometry and its laws, he said, the techniques of apometry proved to be applicable to anyone, to any kind of a person, independent of age, health, or mental stage. Anyone can be submitted to apometry. We had positive results even with patients of zero rationality, not reachable by hypnosis. He said that. And many others after him have said that also, with experience, based on experiences. Because when you unfold a patient who is under mental, who is disabled mentally, you speak to the spirit is totally free. The spirit answers, his or her spirit's answers freely of anything. It's not a miraculous technique, as Dr. Costa also said, but through the techniques of apometry, one is able to assist people on the treatment of innumerable disease, innumerable pathologies. Dr. Costa also said that, especially those patients who are willing to change. That is very important to understand, because listen to this. Some patients want to be helped, but they don't want to help themselves. That's for sure. They want anyone to do something for them, not themselves. They don't want to change habits, bad habits, that sometimes the bad habits they have are related to what they have, to the pathology they have. But they do not want to change the way they live in any sense, any degree. Those patients probably, most likely, will not be helped in its fullest sense. Because at the end, the problem will get back to the same place where it was.